Hello, and welcome to Tomversations. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd, and today I'd like to talk to you about wireless networking. You've no doubt heard the news that the Federal Communications Commission has approved the use of the 6 gigahertz wireless spectrum for non-licensed devices. What does that mean for you? And what does it mean going forward for the wireless networking equipment that you're going to buy? Well, let's have a conversation about that. In order to break this topic down, I want to cover it in 3 specific areas. First, I want to talk about spectrum. Then, I want to talk about standards. And lastly, I want to talk about marketing. So let's get started. The first conversation will be about spectrum. Now, in order for a wireless device to be able to transmit on a specific spectrum, it needs a radio that is attuned to that spectrum. There are currently 3 wireless spectrum bands that non-licensed devices transmit in: 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz. Now, in order to visualize these a little easier, I'm going to borrow a chart from my friend Keith Parsons, who did an amazing job of delivering all this information in an easy to digest format. First, let's look at 2.4 gigahertz. This is probably the most well-known band for people operating home or enterprise wireless networks, as it is the frequency that has been used the longest. 2.4 gigahertz contains 80 megahertz of spectrum bandwidth. Now, in order to make sure that devices can transmit on those channels without interfering with each other, those are divided up into 20 megahertz channel bandwidths. There are 3 of them. 2.4 gigahertz has been around for a while. It's also so well known that it's very easy to manufacture cheap radios to broadcast on that frequency. So 2.4 gigahertz will be seen quite a bit in Internet of Things devices, especially those that don't cost a lot. There are a lot of other devices that broadcast in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum frequency, Bluetooth being the primary one, but also things like wireless baby monitors, wireless microphones, and microwaves. So there are some challenges to operating in the 2.4 gigahertz band. 5 gigahertz is the next band I want to talk about. It is 500 megahertz of spectrum. So it's a lot larger than the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. It has 25 20 megahertz wide channels, and it is very likely the one that you're using at home right now because of advances in wireless networking and standards. It has a significantly higher number of channels, and these channels can be multiplexed together to provide more bandwidth for devices to transmit. Think of it a lot like gluing 2 buckets together. You now have twice as much available capacity to carry things, in this case, data, which means if the packet sizes you're transmitting are the same size, you can transmit the entire packet much quicker, which for wireless networks means you are transmitting less time, you get off the air faster, which is an effective increase in bandwidth. All right, so let's talk about the newest spectrum allocation from the FCC, 6 gigahertz. This is 1200 megahertz of channel bandwidth that has been allocated. That means it's 59 20 megahertz channels. That's a lot of bandwidth. It's over twice what's available in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. And when you add up the fact that those channels can be multiplexed together into higher bandwidths like 40, 80, or 160 megahertz, there are more 80 megahertz wide channels in 6 gigahertz than there are 40 megahertz wide channels in 5 gigahertz. There's a lot of available spectrum for us to use, provided that we have the radios to transmit in that spectrum. But we'll come back to that later. All right, so there are 3 wireless spectrums that we can transmit in: 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and now 6 gigahertz. But what about standards? Standards for wireless networking are created by the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or the IEEE. Their 802 standard defines networking. One of the substandards, 802.11, defines wireless networking. They have worked hard over the years to define a variety of protocols and standards to operate wireless networks. The 3 that are most interesting to us today are 802.11n, 802.11ac and 802.11ax. 802.11n is the standard that you're likely using at home if you have any 2.4 gigahertz devices. Why? It was the first to adopt 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrum in the same standard. It's a little over 10 years old at this point and has been widely deployed all over the enterprise and consumer markets. 802.11ac is the successor standard to 802.11n, but it only operates in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. Now, some of the things that 802.11ac enabled were more throughput for devices by bonding more channels together. So 802.11n would allow for 20 megahertz wide channels in 2.4 gigahertz or 40 megahertz wide channels in 5 gigahertz. 802.11ac provided for 80 and 160 megahertz channel bandwidths with requisite increase in speed and throughput thereof. But it only worked with 5 gigahertz devices, which could be one of the reasons why we've seen a huge push to put 5 gigahertz radios in phones and tablets and laptops and a bunch of other devices. 802.11ac was released in 2 waves, the second which received a marketing term of gigabit Wi-Fi. Now, the latest standard is 802.11ax. And I say it that way because it's not officially ratified yet. It is expected to be ratified this year. But most people are treating it like a standard. With all of the definitions that have been released, we're already seeing hardware that utilizes the 802.11ax standard. It is 2.4, 5, and now 6 gigahertz capable and uses different encoding mechanisms and has different capabilities for transmitting data in a way that increases throughput for all devices. All right, so let's recap. We have 802.11n, which is 2.4 and 5 gigahertz capable. We have 802.11ac, which is 5 gigahertz only. And we have 802.11ax, the soon-to-be standard, which is 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz. All right, so far everything makes sense. Now let's talk about marketing. And in order to do that, we have to define the difference between wireless LANs and Wi-Fi. Wireless LANs are any wireless network. They could be 802.11 networks that we are familiar with for transmission of wireless client devices. They can be Bluetooth, they can be Zigbee. There's a lot of definitions if you go read the IEEE specifications. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, are client and infrastructure radio devices defined by the Wi-Fi Alliance. Think of it this way. The IEEE defines the standard that everything has to adhere to. The Wi-Fi Alliance certifies those devices to transmit using the standard. Wi-Fi is a protected trademark of the Wi-Fi Alliance, so if you see that sticker on a device, you know that the Wi-Fi Alliance has officially blessed it. Now, the Wi-Fi Alliance realized that when customers go shopping at big box stores to buy access points, they don't know anything about standards. And having letters after numbers is confusing. So they decided that they needed to adopt marketing terminology for the various Wi-Fi standards to make it easier for customers to compare. So 802.11n was retroactively named Wi-Fi 4 because it's the 4th generation Wi-Fi spec. Naturally, 802.11ac became Wi-Fi 5, and 802.11ax became Wi-Fi 6. But here's where we run into a small problem. When the Wi-Fi Alliance made the definition of these marketing terms, 6 gigahertz was not available to be used legally as a spectrum yet. So Wi-Fi 6, as defined by the Wi-Fi Alliance, is 2.4 and 5 gigahertz 802.11ax only. In order to call out that devices were capable of transmitting in the 6 gigahertz spectrum, the Wi-Fi Alliance created a new marketing term, Wi-Fi 6E, because having letters after numbers isn't that confusing after all. Wi-Fi 6E is the operation of 802.11ax in the 6 gigahertz band only. All right, so let's recap to make sure we're all on the same page. So there are 3 unlicensed spectrums that wireless clients can broadcast in: 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz. There are essentially 3 standards that devices today can use or will shortly be using: 802.11n, 802.11ac, and 802.11ax. Okay? Then there are marketing terminologies that are used to describe the operation of those standards in those bands. That would be Wi-Fi 4, which is 802.11n, operating in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Wi-Fi 5, which is 802.11ac, operating in 5 gigahertz only. Wi-Fi 6, which is 802.11ax, operating in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. And Wi-Fi 6E, which is 802.11ax in 6 gigahertz only. All right. I think that clarifies everything. Now, the big question, what exactly does this mean for you? Well, that means you're going to have to evaluate the equipment that you have. So do you need to upgrade? The question for you is whether or not you anticipate that you're going to start getting new devices that will take advantage of Wi-Fi 6E or 6 gigahertz spectrum. Now, the catch here is, since we just got permission to use this band from the FCC, there really aren't a lot of devices out there that are capable of using it, and you can't buy any of them right now. There are a couple of reference radios from the chipset manufacturers that are going to be installed in devices coming up soon, but those are infrastructure devices, the access points on the wall. The client devices don't have those radios yet, and they're not expected to show up until later in the year. So if you can hold out, you're probably going to want to take a look at upgrading to a Wi-Fi 6 and 6E tri-band radio, which broadcasts in the 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz spectrums. That will allow you to purchase new client devices, such as whenever Apple decides to put a 6 gigahertz radio in the iPad and then the iPhone or the MacBook. And you can use that 6 gigahertz radio as soon as it comes online. Now, you're going to pay a little bit of a price premium for this because you're paying for an extra radio, you're paying for extra hardware and engineering. But it's the best way to future-proof right now, especially if you've already allocated budget for the purchase. However, if you have an allocated budget for your purchase already, and you don't anticipate doing a device refresh anytime in the next 18 to 24 months, you probably want to wait anyway, because the Wi-Fi 6 capable access points that are being sold with dual band radios, AX in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz spectrums, are probably going to go on sale, because clients aren't going to want to buy those for the same price that they could purchase a tri-band radio. Now, you're probably sitting there at home asking yourself, okay, so I know 6 and I know 6E now, but should I just wait for Wi-Fi 7? Is that even a thing? And the answer is sort of. We've already identified the emerging standard from the IEEE, which will likely be tagged as Wi-Fi 7 whenever it is formally ratified. That's 802.11be. Now, it is operation in 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz, and it uses something called extremely high throughput wireless in order to transmit large amounts of data. Some of the ways that it does this are to increase the number of multi-input, multi-output antennas, also known as MIMO, as well as support for 320 megahertz wide channels. So if we go back to Keith's chart, in 6 gigahertz, there are 7 non-overlapping 160 megahertz wide channels. Realistically speaking, we're probably looking at getting maybe 3 320 megahertz channels out of this allocation. All right. I hope this makes sense to you as someone who's interested in wireless technology. There's a lot of other great resources out there to learn more about what this means for you and how things are changing on almost a daily basis at this point. I'll link some of them in the show notes. Thanks for joining me for this Tomversation. I had a great time teaching you a little bit about wireless networking. Hopefully it was informative and enlightening for you as well. If you'd like to read more great content like this at our website at gestaltit.com, we welcome you to go over there and check it out. Also, if you have any topic suggestions for future Tomversations, please make sure to send them my way. The easiest way is to follow me on Twitter at NetworkingNerd. I would welcome the opportunity to share some great Tomversations with you in the future.